Hey everybody, welcome to our channel. In this video and this video series, we're going to be discussing all of our juicy theories and the details of Presumed Innocent episode by episode from Apple TV, and we're really excited to get into it. We also have a podcast called Men Search for Meaning, where we chat about and explore all kinds of relatable concepts and facts of life. So if you enjoy the discussion, then subscribe and be sure to check out some of our other videos on the channel as well. Very exciting episode. Obviously, the end, as has been consistent throughout the series so far, is the most impactful piece. They've made sure to have some bomb that they drop at the end of every episode. And this one, to me, I think could have been the most substantial that we've seen so far. So I have thoughts about that. I have some theories about that. But let's work our way through the episode before just starting at the end. So one of the things that happened first in my memory is Raymond and Rusty had a bit of an awkward conversation. Rusty comes in after a bad night, says, "I didn't sleep at all," seems very distraught and irritable, and Raymond chooses that moment to tell him he's a piece of shit, basically. And he's like, "Well, it's your fault. You did this, Mm-hmm. Oh, you're just a fucking pig." And I thought that was interesting. I didn't like to see it because it, in a way, maybe is cracks forming in their relationship or the foreshadowing of cracks forming. But at the very least, it was kind of a tone-deaf thing on Raymond's part, in my mind, where, when people are admittedly having a bad day or a bad time acutely, not a good time to pile on unless you really are interested in escalating things. And I feel like they have a interest in not escalating things. So did that stand out the same way, or is there something else that you want to jump in with?
Yeah, I feel like pointing out, I don't believe that was at the beginning. That felt like
not the first thing, but
middle.
It was somewhere in the first maybe 10 minutes or something like that.
Yeah, I like going to it first because it stood out. It's one of the first things that really got my attention. What I thought to myself is Raymond is giving Rusty like some tough love, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not agree with it. I wasn't sure if the show intended us to be like, yeah, you are a pig. This is maybe not the right time to tell you that, but no, you fucked up, man. Because I think that Rusty is correct in what he said to B, although his timing is not good. When you're the villain in the narrative, mm-hmm. as far as his own family life and the way he's being perceived, he's nothing but a villain.
Yeah.
While that is very tough, and you definitely deserve to talk about the complexity with your therapist privately, it's not a time to blame the victim. She's going to feel that, and it's not going to play well for you, essentially. It's tactically not a good thing. It's not good for the relationship with your wife. But all that said, I do agree with him that it's more complex than that. And we actually got our first piece of something I've been saying since the very first episode when we've talked about this, which is that in an affair, there's not just one person that cheats. Usually there's some sort of thing going on in the partnership. It's not just like, oh, I got horny and I decided to cheat. It's usually like some deeper thing happening in the relationship. And we learned about that for the first time, in that he and B had drifted apart and weren't even having a conversation, I believe was the exact way that it was put. They couldn't even have a conversation at that point. So their marriage was kind of dead. I don't know for how long. And through that lens, I think Raymond was being too harsh.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to discuss because I feel like reflexively people condemn the cheater and say, oh, anything but condemning the cheater is just making excuses. And I think I'm somewhere in the middle, which is that, yes, there can be situations where someone maybe just acts selfishly and does what they want to do, and that's the story. But I think in many cases, it is a result of a relationship that's not in as good of a place. And I don't know if there's a direct fault that can be played there, but I think what I hear you saying is that situations are more complex and people tend to choose the oversimplified perspective, which is like, oh, it's Rusty's fault. He did it. He's a bad person. Barbara's the victim. She has been wronged. It's that simple, case closed. And I think it can be more complex, and I think they're doing a good job showing us that increased complexity. It's possible that them not being able to have a conversation could be more one person's fault. Like maybe he's working, he's always at the office working, or, he made a point to mention in one part of the episode that he went to a bar, he said, to eat something, but he was drinking primarily because he wasn't in a position to go home. So there seemed to be some avoidance towards going home, or some feelings he's not comfortable displaying in his home life, where he's like, oh, I'm feeling these things, I can't just go home to my family, so there's definitely some stuff going on, and it's hard to say what the basis of that is.
Yeah, well, this episode is where we got a taste of the guiltier looking side of Rusty.
Yeah.
I mean, he couldn't go home because he was so besotted with Carolyn.
Yeah.
He's obsessed. He's contacting her constantly.
Even while at work,
son,
when he's supposed to be working.
Right. And, what Michael said when he was having that conference with Tommy was interesting. Michael, Carolyn's son, that, she was potentially scared of a guy at work, although we need to talk separately about that, since that could have been a misdirection. Who was the guy at work?
Yes, I want to talk about that.
We will we'll talk about that. But, let's say for a moment, maybe it is Rusty she's talking about. We're getting the picture of a guy that is obsessive and, well, we'll get to the end, but also potentially has violence in him. And we're like, oh, shit.
Mm-hmm.
Remember what we said last time we talked for episode 3. I don't think he did it. There's no sign of it. But now we're seeing his less sympathetic side,
mm-hmm.
and the side of him that maybe could have done it.
We'll get right back to the video. But first, we want to remind you that if you're enjoying the discussion, to please hit that like and subscribe button. And also to check out our podcast, Men's Search for Meaning, on this same channel, where we explore and get into all kinds of relatable things about life. So if you want to spend some more time with us, check out those episodes too after this one, and let's get back to it. Yeah. So I'm very glad that the man at work thing stood out to you in the same way, because that to me feels like a very, very classic trope in shows, where It's sort of like what a magician might do, where there's just, or I guess it just comes down to psychology primarily. There's certain assumptions that we make without realizing it in many cases, and we can kind of learn to be aware of these different assumptions. But I think one of them is that here's a situation, Rusty's the suspect, and Michael's in there talking about Rusty, his experience with Rusty in various ways, and he says, she said she was starting to be afraid of a man at work that she had cases with. And I think many people would just think it's Rusty without thinking about it. I think if they really thought about it, they might go, oh yeah, I wonder if it is Rusty. But I think there's this automatic reflex for a lot of people that's just like, oh, it's Rusty. With subconsciously, you're just on board with that being the case. So I'm glad that it stood out to you that it might be someone else, because that would be a really exciting, very small way of planting the seed that there was someone else close by. And, man, who is it? What if it's Tommy? And Tommy is, he's fighting for his own innocence, which is why he has so much zeal and so much of a desire to get Rusty, because he's trying to prove his own innocence. Oh man, there's so many things that can happen.
That's on the table, mostly because of that ambiguous comment that Michael made, that she said there was a guy at work, and then the way that Tommy was like, did he say who it was?
Yeah.
He seemed a little extra curious about that.
But there's a reason for him to be, even if it's not him or someone he knows, he still would ask that question. But there is two possibilities there. There are two possibilities there, which is that he's like, did they say who they saw going in the house?
What, was it me? Yeah. Was it me by chance?
Did you say it was the handsome older gentleman?
Right. I am now curious if there's a possibility that Tommy had a huge crush on Carolyn, or was obsessed with her, or in love with her, or something. We don't know anything about the relationship between Tommy and Carolyn, do we? Have we heard anything relating those two?
No. The only thing that he's done, which could be a totally manipulative tactic, is to say, like when he is talking to Eugenia, which I think was maybe sort of like a clerk or something for Rusty. She definitely is on Rusty's side. And when Raymond comes in later, she says, "Oh, please pass it along that I'm not going to give any testimony against Rusty." Um,
Mm-hmm.
when she was talking with Tommy about being a witness, he said, "This is for Carolyn. We're doing this for Carolyn." So that's the only real connection that he's made to her, which is that he's sort of this white knight in the situation who is wanting to do right by Carolyn, But he would, if he's guilty and he's a bad person, he would definitely have an interest in making it look like Rusty did it, even though it's a real shitty thing to do to protect his own freedom. And the more we're talking about it, the more I really think about casting a lot, looking at which
Yeah.
people they cast, not specifically like, is this a well-known person, but the appearance of someone. Because in many cases, the protagonist or, sort of the good person in the story looks like a good person, and there's a lot of subjectivity here, but I tend to think that most people would agree, yeah, that looks like a nice person. That looks like a good person. And villains have a look to them as well. There's spectrums for each of these things. And there's an interesting character, which is one who doesn't catch your attention, but now that you know about them, you can see them as the villain as well. And
Mm-hmm.
I can see Tommy as that person, where he doesn't look like a bad person. He doesn't really make you feel strongly one way or the other, but he has a little bit of a shit-eating grin quality to him that I would be able to picture him as the person that you knew before finding out they were the villain, and it's still making sense, Like, for example,
Yeah.
Barbara being the potential killer. Can't see it. I suppose anything's possible, and as I thought that, I'm like, I don't know if we can rule that out. But like in shows or movies, it tends to be that not anything is possible, and in many cases, the looks of the character do tell you something about who that character is supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's very interesting. I don't know why, but if I had to guess right now who Carolyn's killer is, my best guess, and there'd be several guesses with percentages that are in like the 20s or something.
Yeah,
There's nothing
yeah.
where I'm like, I give it a 80% chance. My best guess right now would be Tommy.
Wow, that would be very exciting.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot of it is because of the fact that it's a TV show. If it was real life, I probably wouldn't say that,
Sure.
but because it's almost too obvious that it's Rusty, although they are now pushing us in the direction of saying I can see how Rusty would have done it. And I don't think he's a neutral character. I'm not sure if you were. I'm sorry. I don't think Tommy is a neutral character. I don't know if you were implying that. I think he's slightly negative in most people's mind because he's vindictive, and that's not a good trait.
Yeah, I think he's just one that doesn't draw a lot of attention. It's like he's seen like certain mysteries. I like watching mysteries and trying to see if you can figure it out, what sort of level they're operating on. And they try to put certain characters in this exempt category where it's like, oh, it couldn't possibly be them, which is then a really exciting twist if it is them. And he kind of fit that category where it's like, oh, it couldn't be him, because he doesn't have the spotlight on him, but it could be him, the more you think about it.
Right. Well, I can't easily rule it out. As of last episode, I really felt like I would rule out Rusty because he's just not showing the temperament until this episode, or just the way that anybody would act when they could be as cold-blooded enough to murder somebody and hog-tie them. I mean, that's a brutal, angry person with a deep disturbance in their mind. Mm-hmm. And I cannot see Rusty. I still can't quite see him that way, even though I saw violence in him this episode. But Tommy is so motivated, and it seems like it's just spite, vindictiveness. He's got a rival, and whatever. That's his whole life. His life is dedicated to winning and competing, and he's just that sort of bitter type of person. That is, still, I guess, the more likely scenario. But I do think there's nothing stopping it from. There's enough things pointing to him potentially doing it. He's really motivated to find someone else, and then that connects with, or to frame Rusty, it connects with the idea of the under fingernails skin that was found, and Rusty's genuine shock reaction, as if he's like, no, I'm being framed. Mm-hmm. Like, I kind of believe him. What do you think?
Yeah. So two thoughts responding to what you just said. The skin thing, I would read his response differently depending on who he's speaking to.
Mm-hmm.
In this situation, he's speaking to his number one advocate, the person that's
Mm-hmm.
fighting for him. And most people, even if they're guilty, don't want to be found guilty. It's like they want to have their cake and eat it too. And so it's possible that he's putting on a performance if he's guilty, which I'm not saying that I think he is, but if he were, it's possible that he's putting on a performance of some degree, or he's just playing the part to Raymond because Raymond is the person he needs in his corner. As soon as Raymond has considerable reason to doubt him, he's probably not going to want to take on the case. When he discussed the when he discussed the case earlier with his wife, Lorraine, she was like, think about it, like, yes, there's the chance that you win and you get this last hurrah that you're looking for, and that's great. What if you lose? There's a chance you could lose, so I think if the chance of him losing increases, he might not be as gung-ho to pursue it as he is. So that's one thought. I forget what the other thing I was going to say was about that, but we'll go with that for now. I guess it was related to the discussion of Rusty's guilt and bringing in a repeat element that we've seen in the show, which is flashbacks. They've used flashbacks in a lot of ways. There were some really interesting ones here. As a quick tangent, when he's being interviewed by the I forget what her name is, the other person.
Is she Maya? Is that Maya Winslow?
Yeah, Maya. When Maya's interviewing him, she said, "What happened?" And he's like, "What happened?" And we see all these different ways that it played out. So I think some of those were true, some of those were not true, and they're confusing us. But they keep what I'm trying to say is they keep using flashbacks as a storytelling element, and one that I found really interesting here, related to Rusty's guilt or perhaps his innocence, is there was a flashback. Don't remember exactly when in the episode, but he sees Carolyn pick up the fire poker, which was the murder weapon, and looks nervously outside. And so it's possible that, for Rusty to see it that way, I don't think a guilty person that knew that they murdered this person with this thing, with this fire poker, could imagine her holding it, looking outside. That seems to imply some innocence, because Rusty is able to imagine, like, Rusty's not in his head trying to convince us as the viewers that he's innocent. His own private thoughts that we have access to are just for him and him alone. So the fact that he was able to see her holding it after he had left, it was the implication I got, makes me think that that's a subtle way of showing his innocence. But I don't know. So it could be that, Rusty leaves, someone was watching, goes in after her, takes the weapon from her, kills her with it, and then sets up the scene to look like it was Rusty or someone on the inside, because the way she was tied up, I don't think were details that were released to the public. So yeah, that little flashback was interesting to me with regard to his innocence or guilt.
Huh. I didn't even notice that, honestly, that she was holding the fire poker after he left within his own flashback talking to Maya.
I'm not positive that it was once he left, but that was the impression that I got. So I think they showed that, but I can't say, I'm 100% certain that was the order it happened in. But it was in his memory, and he sees her holding it, like looking outside nervously, like something was happening, and she was like starting to get scared.
Yes. What do you think about the fact that this is now the second time in a flashback, although this, I'm thinking, was his private thoughts as opposed to potentially someone else's image of what happened that night, of him punching Carolyn, Rusty punching Carolyn. Did we not see that? Him striking her, maybe slapping her, I'm not sure.
She slapped him in that, like, what happened scene. We saw her hit him. I don't think we saw him hit her, but I can't say for certain. But there did appear to be, I can say for certain there were some scenes in that sequence where there was tension and he was losing his temper or acting erratically to some degree. So hitting is possible, but I definitely remember her hitting him in that scene.
Okay. Maybe I imagined that or saw what you're saying, but I want to go back and look. Okay, well, if that's the case, then that suspicion doesn't land anywhere.
Uh-huh.
Um, what about Brian Ratzer? What do we make of
Yeah, we're on the same page.
this?
I was just thinking in my head,
Yeah.
we need to talk about Brian now. Yeah, very interesting to say the least. So, when this case, I'm kind of getting confused at this point. What happened when the Liam Reynolds Bunny Davis case was tried? But there was this second sperm sample that they had noticed. Rusty was unaware of it, and so he goes and verbally assaults the doctor responsible, even though it was Carolyn that seemed to have withheld it from him, which is what gave rise to our theory that perhaps she knew the killer or one of these people. She was involved somehow and was kind of covering things up. Based on our theory that he said, "Oh, you fucked me over," So they weren't able to find any information about Brian or anyone from that sample, but then Rigo seems to be a very smart detective, and she checked other DNA sources like Ancestry.com, or perhaps got a warrant for Ancestry.com based on this, and found the guy. They go and talk to him, very clearly rattled. He seems like a small timer kind of guy because he really felt the heat and did not handle himself well. They totally manhandled him in that situation. He got flustered, he got nervous, which leads to his outburst that we'll come back to. But yeah, a very interesting character. I think he's a misdirection. I think he will unveil more of the story, but I don't think he plays a big role in what happened. He just seems too small-timey to me. But I think he will be a lead that helps to continue to open this up further. What do you make of the introduction of Brian Ratzer?
Yeah, I don't think we're supposed to know too much yet, but the one thing I agree with that I thought about listening to you is that he is unsophisticated compared to all the other characters, in that they go to his house, they threaten telling his wife about the fact that he must have had an affair, maybe with Bunny Davis, or his sperm is found somewhere outside his house, so that's not good. He shows his guilt and is like, you son of a bitch, don't tell my wife anything. So he's just, easily handled, like you pointed out. And then he is furious that he was, someone came into his house and threatened to tell his wife about his...
I think he said, you fuck with my family, I'll fuck with your family.
Yeah, so he's just so simply... He's acting out of simple revenge and kind of in an old-fashioned way with no complexity or sophistication. And that doesn't feel like the character that is going to be unveiled as the killer.
Yeah, very well said.
I don't know if I have anything else on him.
Oh, we're very aligned today. I'm thinking the exact same thing. I'm like, all right, definitely need to talk about him, but I think he's going to be a episode 5 kind of unveiling. I think he's on the short list of things that we need to find out more about in the show. So I think episode 5 is going to show us at least a few things about him to deepen that portion of the story. But we don't know much at this point, except the ending, which I still want to wait a little bit to come back to, because that was the biggest piece for me. We've touched on it a little bit. Just as a funny aside, I've never seen a show that has portrayed, in my mind, a therapist accurately. Always very over-prescribing, very inappropriate even seeming. That there's this funny trope on TV shows of therapists, and in my experience, it's grossly inaccurate. And the same was true here, where she's like, a therapist that was seeing someone individually and seeing the couple is already pretty inappropriate. Usually you would have a separate therapist for those contexts. Then she takes on the son and then finally says, you know what? We need to be splitting this up. I want to see only you. Like, that seems so inappropriate, so overstepping, so pushing her own narrative at that point. And it's not something we need to get into. It's just this funny thing that shows just never get therapists right, in my opinion. And did that stand
I don't think I've ever seen one that did.
Yeah. Did that catch your attention based on your own experience, or did it just kind of blend into the...
No, it definitely did.
Yeah.
Every time I see a therapist in any show, I think to myself, that is not how a genuine, responsible therapist would act. They are meant to be very ethical, be sort of just a mirror for you and your problems, especially if it's psychodynamic
Yeah,
therapy. And they are not meant to be like sitting there giving you direct advice practically all the time,
pushing you even.
uh, pushing you. Yeah, yeah. That is not. That's not how long-term therapy works. It might be like immediate trying to crack a smoking habit type of cognitive behavioral. But anyway, no, that's a great aside. I noticed that as well.
Yeah. So two things. I'll let you go where you want to go. Um, I love seeing each episode, even though it's kind of getting repetitive. I love seeing Nico's concern for Tommy's approach. It's just
Yeah.
it's so juicy to him that he's like, "You gonna be all right, bud?" You know, he's like,
Yeah.
and yeah, there's something I really enjoy about that. And then sort of a minor piece as well, but something we should touch on. Do you think that Barbara will go through with the affair? She's stepping ever closer to it, and they really made us think it was happening. You know, they show her
They
in a
did.
sex scene, um, and they even show someone wearing a white shirt, which the guy was wearing. You know, or I guess at that point you saw his hands, so you could tell it was a different person. But they really
Yeah.
tried to make us think. You know, I think that was fully intentional. So yeah, which of those things do you prefer to talk about?
Um, well, I think I would want to just talk briefly about the bartender thing because yeah, they intentionally tried to
Trick
make
us,
us
yeah.
think. Yeah, they tried to trick us into thinking she was going to go through it, and I, as I was watching it unfold, and her being a little charmed by him, and him start advancing on her, I just kept feeling like, oh, please don't do this, B. Don't do it because then you take your sort of virtuousness as a character. So far, you can't really blame her much for anything. She really is a victim and a strong person and a person who cares about her family. She's honorable in so many ways.
She
And this would
continues
be a
being
mark on her.
yeah, she continues being supportive to Rusty.
She does.
Well,
She shows a lot of
she
honor.
stepped back a little bit, but yeah, for the most part, she does show a lot of honor, and she's very virtuous, and this would be a big step back for that for her, which I think, as hard of a time as she's having with being in that position, it does seem like an important position for her if she wants to kind of be right in the situation, which I think is something she's holding on to in a way that this. It's like you could understand how someone might want retaliation when they feel they've been wronged, when they've been wronged. But yeah, I agree that
Yeah.
it really will not help things. It's going to make her relationship with her kids more problematic. And she specifically said, so I was very struck by the mature conversations that they're able to have. You know, it's like
Yeah.
they sleep together when she gets home. I guess she was drunk and already kind of thinking about sleeping with someone, so it kind of makes sense that it happened despite all the tension. But
Hmm.
the conversation after, you know, it's like where she's like, "That's not the sex we normally have. Is that the sex you had with her?" It's like, how many people would want to know the answer to that question? You know, like, and just that conversation, I'm struck by the maturity and the things they're able to talk about without getting triggered, without it escalating. Really, there are things that escalate for them, but it's pretty amazing.
Hmm.
Um, and
Yeah, that's good writing.
yeah, and she mentions, I think it was in that conversation, she said, "Did you ever think about what you were willing to lose or something?" Like asking if he understood the stakes of the affair, which implies that she thinks about it that way. And clearly, a very close, intimate relationship with her children is extremely important to her. And if they found out that she had a revenge affair, that would really be disastrous for her, what seems like her most important relationships, which are with her children. So it seems possible. She's also, you know, like, oh, I kind of like day drinking, you know, like I feel better than I normally do. So it's possible she'll be seduced, you know, figuratively and literally, uh, if she continues to handle things in this way. It doesn't seem like she's someone who drinks very much, and now she's drinking, which lowers inhibitions, and combining it with potentially herself getting into a situation, which I guess could be interesting. She would understand more how this kind of thing can happen. It's not always this thoughtful decision on what is a cost benefit analysis of an affair. You know, like that's not how that happens. So perhaps
Yeah,
they're
but
wanting to show us the other side of that.
Yeah, but I also don't think it's impulsive.
Yeah.
I guess in a long term marriage, my feeling about it is that it would not be an impulsive thing. You drank too much. Perhaps a flirtation or something could occur that way,
Hmm.
something of that nature, but not like a full blown affair. That's not impulsive.
Hmm.
As I've been saying, my view on it is that it brews unconsciously between the characters when a marriage is deadening or when there's a deep mutual disrespect or anger or something like that that's underneath the surface that the two people are not aware of but are
Hmm.
unconsciously agreeing to.
Hmm.
But I want to talk about, I want to respond to you referring to the sophistication of their conversation after they had sex,
Hmm.
which I was also very struck by. I was like, what a mature conversation. I really admired the writing. That is what indicates to me that this is a really good show. Is that she says this is not the normal type of sex we have, which I thought was an interesting reflection. It's like, wow, she was able to like reflect immediately about that,
Hmm.
and not just be like, oh, cool, we went back to our younger days there. It was like, she's like, what was
That
going
was
on there?
suspicious.
Yeah. Well, they also, to me, clearly indicated that she was thinking about the bartender because at the end of the sex scene, they show her and she is not focused on him. She's like this, just distracted, or maybe I'm not imitating well
Yeah.
enough, but she's glassy eyed.
She seemed almost upset at that point. Like once it had ended, like very quickly the spell wore off, and she was like,
Yeah.
but yeah, she
Right.
definitely
Right.
looked
Right.
away. The intimacy was over, and it gave way quickly to some other very complex, much less sexy feeling I saw in her.
It was less sexy for sure. And to me, that was clearly her thinking about the bartender. But I also see, and I think you're implying perhaps that was her beginning to think about the sophisticated concepts of what it means about their marriage when their marriage kind of lost its aliveness,
Yeah,
um, and where they go from here. How do they repair, if they do repair, the relationship? And it connects with the therapist comment that if she just keeps being so honorable and holding the marriage together for the kids, then she might be filled with hatred later. 5 years from now or whatever, when the kids are out of the house. So it seemed they brought all of that out, and they weren't just enjoying like, hey, we got to have a feeling of connection.
hmm,
Um,
yeah. She mentioned one other thing that could be the explanation for her look at the end, which was, did it feel like we were trying? Or she said it felt like we were trying to prove something to ourselves. That if they could have some passionate sex, that it meant that there was still a strong nucleus to their relationship. So it's
yes.
possible that right upon, right as they were done, basically, that she had that feeling. It sort of washed over her like, oh, was that even real? Or was that, us pretending that there's still something here? That's
Yeah,
another
that
possibility.
that to me was so difficult to ascertain.
Mm-hmm.
Like the fact that she was able to say that, I was like, wow, she is showing some emotional brilliance,
Yeah.
to be able to say that. I think that was amazing that she could say, perhaps it wasn't just something that happened and we felt connected again. Perhaps it wasn't all the confusion and tension being let out,
Yeah.
but we were sort of, there was a fakeness in there. We were trying to say there is something left because we so badly want there to be something left, even though we're, past perhaps a point of no return. And certainly our baggage is now forever type of baggage.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm not convinced.
so
I'm not convinced by that theory of hers. I think it's an interesting theory, and it's one that if you're in that situation, you have to go, is that true? But it seems like a reach to me. I don't know. They're plenty comfortable being cold in their relationship that I don't think they're going out of their way to fake something. I do think there is genuine connection there. It just is going to take some real intentional exploration because of how young they were when they got together and how many difficult things they have to navigate. But like when she was ferociously cleaning the bike, which was a hilarious scene to me because she's like up in the middle of the night
yeah,
scrubbing this bicycle seat, and he comes in and he kind of holds her and she doesn't recoil from that. She seems to just settle right into being comforted by this particular person. So for me,
hmm,
there's a lot of signs that they have genuine connection. They can't take a backseat role to letting things work themselves out. Like if they want to save their marriage, I believe they absolutely can, but it's going to require all of their attention and focus. But I do think
yeah.
there's connection there. We've seen it in so many different ways.
Yeah, I don't think I would have jumped to that, but because I believed your theory a little bit more than you did. But I like what you're saying. I like the optimism in it. I tend to be inclined that way, and I'd say overall I agree with it.
Mhm.
Um, and I did want to jump to Rusty's violence and the
Yes. Yeah,
possibility of
we got
him
to
being
talk
a
about
murderer.
the
So
end of the episode. You want to go first?
okay, so yeah, can I frame this? Okay, let me start. There's many places to start with Raymond's contention that Rusty feels shame but not guilt.
Hmm. Yeah, that
And
was
he
a big scene.
describes that was a big scene. He describes the difference as shame is a self imposed feeling. It lives within you when you feel you've done something wrong, or you just always walk around feeling like you do things wrong. You're producing your own shame. And he's saying guilt is externally produced when you empathize with other people's pain.
I
That's how
interpreted
I
them both
interpret it.
as internal, but the way I heard it was shame is what you feel for you, guilt is what you feel for other people. They're both your feelings that you're going to have internally, but it's like he understands that Rusty is emotionally impacted. He just doesn't think it's because he's taking into account what he's done to other people. And the guilt will be like, wow, I'm very much struck by how my actions have impacted these people I care about. Whereas shame is like, it is very hurtful for me to be exposed for my actions and to be seen in a way that I don't want to be seen.
Okay, I like what you're saying. I'd have to think more about it, but generally sounds right. I believe he also used the word narcissism and some other really intense words. So is he essentially saying, I think that you are not considering other people's experiences enough? Like you're filled
Yeah,
with shame, but you're not empathizing enough?
going back to that scene, I interpreted it as one of those fights you have from bad timing. We don't
Hmm.
know what Raymond's night was like, what his morning was like, but they both were going at each other, and despite being best friends, or they were going at each other more than I would expect because they're best friends. And we know what Rusty's night was like, so his reaction makes sense. But it was out of character for Raymond, and the mention of narcissism was, he's really pushing Rusty about what happened, why did this happen, and Rusty was like, it's complicated. He's like, complicated how? Narcissism, blah blah blah, and like rattles off a bunch of possible things that could explain what had happened, saying like, yeah, give me something, tell me, give me something, give me a foothold for how this happened for you, something I can run with. Not that he was
Yeah.
prescribing that necessarily, but he was just like, all right, yeah, it's complicated, you got to say more than just that abstract thought, get into what happened, because it seems
Yeah.
like Rusty's not getting there. But overall I interpreted it as like a temporary, we'll patch things up fight from two people having a bad day.
Right, but then what do you think about the fact that when Rusty was not there, Raymond was privately saying, "There's no way we're putting that guy in the witness stand," when he
Yeah,
was talking to his co-counsel Maya. So he really believes that he emanates,
yeah.
guilt, contradiction, violence, something. Like he was really,
My take on that
yeah.
was just how unstable Rusty is, and
Hmm.
his tendency to kind of get off topic, to ramble, to say things he shouldn't say. Like, I think what they were saying there is like, we can't let him on the stand because it's like he's not reliable right now. I don't know if he's going to suddenly say something new. He's not able to be measured and careful in this particular context, despite those being strengths of his in other areas. That he's like, I didn't take that as a collective agreement towards his guilt or culpability in her murder, but more so just like, yeah, he's a bit erratic. That's going to hurt our case to put him up there more than it will help.
Yeah, I took it a little stronger than you did,
Hmm.
but generally in the same place.
Yeah.
And let's see, any last thoughts just as we wrap
Yeah,
up?
real quick. It's just the very end. So we can probably say this quickly, but this is what we touched on in the beginning that I was excited to come back to. So Rusty's having a difficult phone call with Raymond. He hears this banging. Jaden is screaming. It's like they really showed this ratcheting up of like all this stuff going on, which I think is what caused Rusty to snap. So then he looked like
Hmm.
Jaden's yelling at him. Barbara's saying she wants to call the police. He needs to tell her not to call the police because that'll make things worse. And then, there's so many things happening that he kind of just like short circuits in that moment and punches Brian multiple times, pretty brutally. And what that showed me is for the first time that one, he's capable of violent outbursts, even though he doesn't portray as a violent person. And the reason for
Hmm.
that is like he got overwhelmed, basically, and there's a number of things that could do that. In this case, it was all these people yelling at him and too much stuff happening that he wasn't able to handle it. But basically, he lost his grip on the situation and was capable of a violent outburst, which is the first time we've seen the real potential for him being able to do something like murder Carolyn. Just, he
Yep.
gets emotionally overwhelmed by something. We don't know exactly what that would be, but they showed that he's capable of doing that. And I think that was a huge bomb to drop, especially after, basically 3.9 episodes of us feeling like, it couldn't be Rusty, And I still
Yeah.
don't think it's him. I think that's, again, a misdirection, but I could
Yeah.
definitely be wrong, but it was a big moment. It showed us a side of him we have not seen before and how
Yep.
that can happen. Not just that he punched him, but how it happens.
Right. I think, assuming Rusty didn't do it, which is still my assumption, I think this, if we could look back in a few episodes and paint this as, well, this was a super high emotion time wrapped in a context that is about as high emotion as you can imagine. You're being accused of murder of the person that you were in love with. I mean,
Yeah.
this is you had to see the murder. I mean, it's
Marriage is
horrific.
falling apart.
And
Yeah.
then, yeah, everything, his world is falling apart. And then literally someone is banging violently at his door and his family's upset.
Yeah.
It is kind of reasonable to go nuts on somebody, although not everybody has it in them to wail away at somebody like that. Although possibly it was, just all that rage he's been containing and all that frustration he's been containing that
Yeah.
finally is getting an outlet because someone justifiably is doing something, wrong. So we'll see what happens, but that was
Episode
very
5,
interesting.
yeah, episode 5 will be
Yep.
exciting in a lot of ways. I'm very much looking forward to that conversation. So thanks everyone for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe. Just as a reminder, like we mentioned earlier, we also have a podcast on this channel called Men's Search for Meaning, where we explore various relatable aspects of life. So if you enjoy our analysis of the show, you'll probably enjoy our analysis of those topics as well. So we hope you'll check that out. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let us know your thoughts down below, and we'll see you for episode 5.